At Thanksgiving dinner, my mother said, "He's a thief just like his dad." My brother said, "Don't let him in the kitchen, something will go missing." I said nothing. But before we ate, my son put his phone on the table and said, "I recorded them in the garage. They took your ring trixing." Thanksgiving dinner had just begun when my mother turned to the table, folded her napkin with that slow, icy grace she always had, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "He's a thief, just like his dad." I froze. My son, Kellen, was sitting beside me, 8 years old, hands folded politely in his lap. He looked up at me, confused. My mother didn't look at me when she said it. She looked across the table toward my brother, Dorian, like I was a ghost in the room. Dorian, sitting with his tie loosened and a glass of wine in his hand, smirked. "Better keep him out of the kitchen," he said. "Something's bound to go missing." Nobody laughed, not even Dorian's wife, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My father, quiet as always, cleared his throat and looked down at his plate. No one defended me. No one said, "That's too far," or "Don't speak like that in front of a child." They just sat there. Let it hang in the air like stale smoke. I didn't say a word, not because I didn't want to, but because I had been here before. Not just in this house at this table, but in this exact moment, blamed, accused, humiliated. Ever since my ex-husband was sent to prison 5 years ago for fraud, my family had treated me like I shared his guilt, like betrayal was something passed down, like genetics. I had walked away from all of them back then. I had spent years rebuilding my life. I came back this year for one reason, my son. Kellen didn't fully understand the history. He just knew we hadn't come for Thanksgiving in a long time. He missed his grandfather. He wanted to be part of the family again. I told myself maybe things had changed. Maybe if I showed up with grace, if I stayed calm and quiet, I could prove something to them, to myself. But now, sitting there, I felt the old shame rising up again, as raw and real as it ever was. And Kellen, my sweet boy, was watching it happen. He looked from my mother to me and whispered, "Why did Grandma say that?" I didn't know what to tell him. I reached for his hand under the table, gave it a small squeeze. He didn't let go. The turkey was steaming on the platter. The candles flickered like nothing was wrong. My mother poured herself more wine. Dorian scrolled briefly through his phone. Conversation resumed around me like someone had just commented on the weather, but Kellen was still looking at me. He leaned in close and whispered again, quieter this time, "Mommy, is it because they don't like us?" Before I could answer, he stood up, pulled something from his hoodie pocket, and placed it on the table. His little phone, a cheap secondhand one I got him so he could text me when I was at work. He tapped the screen with his thumb. "I recorded them," he said, "in the garage. They took your ring." It was like every sound in the room evaporated. Forks froze in midair. Heads turned. I could hear the click of my mother's bracelet as she dropped her wine glass back onto the tablecloth too hard. Kellen looked at me, not scared, not confused anymore, just steady, like he knew exactly what he'd done. I looked at him and knew something had just shifted. This wasn't just about a stolen ring or cruel words. This was the moment something cracked open in our family. And for once, I wasn't the one breaking. I hadn't been home for Thanksgiving in 5 years. Not since the night my ex-husband was arrested, and my mother told me never to bring that kind of shame into her house again. She said it quietly, not in anger, but in a tone that landed like a door closing for good. Back then, I didn't argue. I had a newborn, a mountain of legal bills, and no energy left to defend myself. I left and I stayed gone. Kellen was just a baby when it happened, so he didn't remember the house, the table, the sharp way my mother smiled like it cost her something. All he knew was that every November, while the other kids at school talked about traveling and cousins and turkey, he and I ate takeout at home, just the two of us. This year was different. A few weeks before the holiday, my dad called. He said he missed me. His voice cracked a little when he mentioned Kellen. He said, "He's growing up so fast. I don't want to miss everything." My father was never the loud one in the family, never the one who picked sides, but I could hear something in his voice, regret maybe, or loneliness. I didn't say yes right away. I told him I'd think about it. Then I sat with Kellen and asked, "Would you want to go to Grandma and Grandpa's for Thanksgiving this year?" He lit up. He had never asked why we didn't visit them, but he had noticed, and like every child, he still hoped for something good. I packed the car on Thanksgiving morning. I made Kellen promise to stay close to me, be polite, to speak only when spoken to. Not because I was afraid of him misbehaving, but because I didn't want to give them any reason, any crack they could dig into. When we pulled into the driveway, I felt it in my stomach. The tension I thought I'd left behind years ago. The house looked the same. Neatly trimmed hedges, fresh wreath on the door, curtains drawn just enough to show the perfectly lit living room. But it felt cold. Eloise opened the door before we knocked. She hugged Kellen quickly, told him how tall he'd gotten, then turned to me and said, "You look tired." No hello. No smile. Just a scan of my face, my coat, the scuff on my boots. Dorian was already inside, glass of wine in hand, wearing a button-down shirt like he was on his way to a networking event. He hugged Kellen, barely glanced at me, and went back to talking with his wife. She nodded at me with a tight smile. I helped set the table. Every fork and knife was placed with surgical precision. My mother walked around correcting things, napkin angles, centerpiece symmetry, the color of the cranberry sauce. I tried not to flinch under her gaze. Kellen stayed by my side most of the afternoon. When I sent him to the den to play, he came back 10 minutes later, quiet, hands in his pockets. He didn't say much. I assumed he was just shy, overwhelmed by so many adults. As dinner time approached, I told myself to focus on what mattered. My son was here. My father was happy to see us. Maybe this could be a first step, even if it was a small one. I tried to believe that if I stayed calm, if I didn't rise to the bait, I could protect Kellen from the ugliness that used to hang in every corner of this house. But even before we sat down, I started to feel it. The sideways comments, the raised eyebrows, the way Eloise looked at my son like he was something fragile and already broken. At one point, she asked me if he had started speech therapy. He doesn't need speech therapy. He's bright, curious, kind. But she asked anyway in front of everyone. Still, I didn't react. I stayed quiet, steady, composed. I told myself I could get through the night. Just one meal, then back home to the small apartment where peace lived, where Kellen and I could breathe. Then I heard them in the kitchen. My mother and Dorian, their voices low, but not careful. "Watch him near the pantry," she said. "He's a thief, just like his dad." And Dorian laughed. That was the moment everything shifted because I wasn't alone anymore. My son was standing right behind me and he heard them too. Kellen stood there in the doorway to the kitchen, small hands curled around the edge of the wall, eyes wide and confused. He had heard them. He heard every word my mother said about him, about me, about his father, who he barely remembered, but who still managed to define how they saw us. I turned slowly and met his eyes. I wanted to say something reassuring, something that would make it all better, but I couldn't find the words. He looked stunned, like something safe inside him had just been cracked open. He wasn't used to adults speaking that way, not about him, not in his presence. I walked over, knelt down, and placed my hands on his shoulders. "You didn't do anything wrong," whispered. "Don't ever believe that." He nodded, but he didn't say anything. The rest of the house buzzed with noise, silverware clinking, oven doors slamming shut, chairs scraping against hardwood floors. My mother acted like nothing had happened. My brother poured himself another drink. They had insulted my child and they didn't even blink. I realized then, this wasn't thoughtless cruelty. It was deliberate. It was who they were. I stayed quiet through the final preparations. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want Kellen to see me break. So I made his plate. I helped carry the food to the table. I smiled when people looked. I kept moving, not because I was fine, but because it was the only way I knew to protect him in that moment. But Kellen stayed close. At one point, he tugged gently on my sleeve and leaned in close. "I saw them in the garage earlier," he whispered. "They were talking weird. I think they were hiding something." I froze. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I recorded it." I looked down. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his little phone. I had given it to him for emergencies and short messages, never expecting him to use it for something like this. But there it was, a simple voice recording labeled Garage. He had named it himself. He handed it to me carefully, like it might shatter if I wasn't gentle. I pressed play and listened. At first, it was just footsteps, muffled voices, but then I heard it. "That ring's worth more than she deserves," my mother said. "Just hide it in the baking tray drawer," Dorian replied. "She won't find it. She doesn't need it. She lost her chance at this family when she married that man." I stopped the recording and stared at the wall for a few seconds. The ring. My engagement ring. The one piece of jewelry I hadn't sold during the divorce because I thought I'd lost it. I searched for weeks. I cried over it. I blamed myself for misplacing it during the chaos. But I hadn't lost it. They had taken it. I looked at Kellen. His face was serious now, focused, older than his 8 years. "Why did you record them?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because you looked sad when we got here." And then I heard them saying your name. I wanted to see if they were being mean. Tears stung the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. I knelt down again and held his face in my hands. "You did the right thing." Kellen nodded slowly. "Are you mad at me?" "No, baby," I said. "Oh, you were brave." Dinner was starting soon. I stood in the doorway holding that little phone, my hands trembling. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't embarrassed or ashamed. I wasn't the girl who used to beg for approval. I was a mother now. I was his mother. I had spent years trying to earn my place back in this family. I kept thinking if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, forgave fast enough, they'd finally let me in again. But they hadn't changed, and now I had proof that they never would. I tucked the phone back into Kellen's pocket and looked around the room. My mother was putting the rolls in a basket like it was a normal holiday. My brother was adjusting the thermostat like it mattered. They were pretending to host a family dinner. But all I saw was a performance, and I was done playing along. I had always believed that silence was safer. I believed that if I stayed quiet, I could keep things from getting worse. I thought if I kept my head down and held my breath, the storm would pass. But when my 8-year-old son looked at me and asked if he had done the right thing by recording his own grandmother and uncle, I understood something I hadn't before. Silence was not safety. It was surrender. I looked at Kellen, his little face serious and waiting. He was watching me, not to see if I was angry, but to see if he'd made me proud. I reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "You were protecting the truth," I told him. "And sometimes, that's the bravest thing a person can do." He nodded, but his eyes were still clouded with something heavier than any child should carry. He had caught a glimpse of how ugly adults could be, and it had changed him. I stepped into the hallway and took a deep breath. The house was filling with the smells of turkey, roasted vegetables, and cranberry sauce. The table was set with delicate china, candles lit at the center, wine glasses filled. Everything looked perfect, but I knew it was a lie, a carefully constructed illusion. Behind the smiling toasts and white tablecloths were the voices on that recording, cold, greedy, and cruel. They didn't just take the ring. They tried to erase everything I had done to survive after my husband was gone. They wanted to make me small again, wanted my son to feel worthless before he even understood who he was. And this time, they had done it while pretending to welcome us home. My mother called from the dining room. "Dinner's ready." I didn't answer. I looked at Kellen, his eyes still locked on mine, and I made a choice. "Come on," I said. "Let's sit down." We walked in together. My father stood when we entered. That small gesture almost broke me. He looked like he didn't know which side to stand on. I knew he had heard them over the years. I knew he had chosen silence too. Eloise was at the head of the table, fixing her napkin with quiet precision. Dorian sat across from her, already halfway through his first glass of wine. The room buzzed with small talk. My mother complimented the stuffing. Dorian laughed about traffic. My sister-in-law passed the rolls with a smile that never quite touched her eyes. We took our seats. Kellen sat next to me, close enough that our shoulders touched. I watched him pull his phone from his pocket and place it gently on the table like it was something sacred. His thumb hovered over the screen. I looked across the table, straight at my mother. "There's something we all need to hear." She blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Kellen tapped the play button. The room went still. First came the footsteps, then the voices. Eloise's voice was unmistakable. "That ring's worth more than she deserves." Dorian's voice followed. "Just hide it in the baking tray drawer. She won't find it. She lost her chance at this family when she married that man." The recording ended. There was no background noise. No one dared to move. Eloise straightened in her chair, but her face had gone pale. "That's taken out of context," she said. "You don't know what we were talking about." I leaned forward. "I do know. That ring was mine. You didn't just take it. You blamed me for losing it. You watched me search the house in tears and said nothing. And now? You sit here and call my child a thief?" Dorian cleared his throat. "You need to calm down." "No," I said. "I'm already calm. That's the difference now. You don't get to rewrite the story anymore. You don't get to raise your glass and pretend this is a family. You can sit here and eat your turkey, but you're going to do it with the truth on the table." My mother looked like she might say something, but I stood before she could. Kellen stood too. I didn't wait for anyone to stop us. Didn't look back. I walked out with my son's hand in mine, his little fingers curled tight around mine like we were walking across ice. I didn't care what happened to the food. I didn't care if they chased us out the door or said my name again after we were gone. I had nothing left to prove. And everything worth protecting was already beside me. We stepped outside into the cold. The sun had dipped behind the trees, leaving a stretch of golden gray across the sky. The air smelled like frost and dead leaves. I didn't rush. I didn't run. Kellen's small hand stayed tightly in mine as we walked toward the car. Behind us, I could hear the muffled confusion through the front door. Chairs scraping back, voices rising. No one came after us. I buckled Kellen into his seat. He looked up at me, eyes wide and unsure. "Are we in trouble?" he asked. "No, baby," I said. "Not even close." He closed his door and slid into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It felt like adrenaline, pride, and grief all tangled into one. I sat there for a minute, breathing. Then I started the car, and we pulled away from the house where I had once been a daughter, once been a sister, once tried to belong. The silence in the car was heavy at first. Kellen stared out the window, his legs swinging slightly off the edge of the seat. Finally, he said, "I didn't know grown-ups could lie like that." I glanced at him. "Sometimes they lie to protect themselves," I said. "Sometimes they lie because the truth scares them." He nodded like he was storing that away. He was only 8, but I knew that day had changed something in him. He had seen me humiliated and then stand back up. He had seen what loyalty looks like and what betrayal feels like when it wears your last name. I pulled into a gas station about 20 minutes down the road. I needed a second to breathe, and Kellen said he was hungry. We sat at a little table inside while he ate a sandwich and a cookie. I drank bad coffee and looked at the red and gold leaves through the window. Kellen tapped the table with his finger. "Are we going to see them again?" "I don't know," I said, "but I don't think we need to right now." He didn't ask anything more after that. When we got home that night, I tucked him into bed. He rolled over onto his side and pulled the blanket up to his chin. Just before I turned off the light, he whispered, "You're not a thief." I stood there for a second, blinking back tears. "And you're not like your dad," I said. "You're you, and I'm proud of you." In my own room, I opened the drawer on my nightstand. Inside was a small box. The ring was still there. I had taken it from the drawer where they hid it, placed it in my purse before we left without saying a word. They didn't deserve a warning. They didn't deserve to keep it. I held it in my palm. It wasn't worth much anymore. It had never been about the money. It was the last thing left from a life that had unraveled fast and hard. I had believed I lost it, just like I had believed I lost my family, my worth, my future. But I hadn't lost anything. It had been taken, and now, it was back. Not because I demanded it, but because my son, small and strong, had believed me when no one else would. He hadn't done it with anger. He had done it with love. I placed the ring on the windowsill. I didn't want to wear it. I didn't need to. It wasn't a symbol of the past anymore. It was a reminder of who I was now. Someone who survived. Someone who raised a child brave enough to speak up in a room full of liars. In the days that followed, no one from my family called. Not even my father. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Maybe he still didn't understand what he had allowed all these years. And maybe that silence was finally honest. The truth had been played out at the dinner table with nothing to hide behind. They couldn't unhear that recording. They couldn't unsee the moment an 8-year-old held up a mirror and showed them who they really were. What I realized that night, driving away from everything I once thought I needed, was that I was already free. They didn't reject me. I had outgrown them. The next morning, I woke up early. The sky outside our apartment was pale and still. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the light shift over the buildings. Kellen was still asleep, curled under his blanket with his favorite stuffed bear tucked in beside him. I looked over at the ring sitting on the windowsill. It caught the morning light casting a thin golden line across the wall. It no longer felt like a reminder of what I had lost. It felt like proof of what I had survived. For years, I believed the story they told me, that I was broken, that I had made too many bad choices, that I was just like the man who hurt us. They used silence and shame to keep me small. They didn't care if I was innocent. They cared that I had fallen and that it gave them someone to blame when their own cracks started to show. I let them write that story for a long time, but not anymore. The Thanksgiving was supposed to be a step toward healing. What it became was the moment everything came into focus. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need a chair at a table where I was never truly welcome. What I needed was what I already had. Kellen, he was the one who saw through it. Not because he understood all the history, but because he understood right from wrong. Because he loved me without conditions, without doubts, without fear. He didn't wait for someone else to speak up. He didn't hesitate. He saw something cruel, and he brought it into the light. He reminded me that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet and small and spoken with a child's voice in the middle of a crowded room. Later that morning, he padded into the kitchen in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Are we okay?" he asked. I pulled him into a hug. "We're better than okay," I said. "You are amazing." He smiled, then asked if we could have pancakes. I made them the way he liked, crispy on the edges with extra syrup. We ate at our little kitchen table, laughing about how badly I'd burned the first batch. It wasn't the kind of Thanksgiving people post on social media. There were no matching outfits, no smiling relatives, no big dining room. But it was peaceful, honest. It felt like hours. Over the next few days, I kept waiting for the phone to ring. I thought maybe my father would call. Maybe someone would try to apologize or explain, but no one did. And that silence, as painful as it was, told me everything I needed to know. For the first time, I wasn't angry about it. I wasn't heartbroken or ashamed. I felt relief. I wasn't missing anything. I wasn't being left out of something sacred. I had stepped away from something toxic, and I wasn't going back. That night, after Kellen fell asleep, I sat down and wrote him a letter. I didn't know if he'd understand it all now, but one day, he would. I told him that he had more courage in one moment than most people find in a lifetime. That being honest isn't always easy, and telling the truth can make people uncomfortable. But it matters, especially when it's hard. I told him that love means standing up for someone when it counts, and that no matter what anyone says, the kind of person you choose to be matters more than the name you carry or the past you come from. He showed me that. An 8-year-old boy with a second-hand phone and a heart big enough to break a lie wide open. Sometimes, the people who call you broken are the ones who did the breaking. And sometimes, the people who save you are the ones you were trying to protect. That Thanksgiving didn't fix my family. It ended it. But it also gave me something better. Clarity, peace, and a deeper bond with my son than I ever thought possible. That day, I stopped trying to be accepted by people who only saw my worst chapters. I started writing the rest of the story myself. And this time, it's mine. Every family has its shadows. But the truth has a way of finding the light, even when it comes from the smallest voice in the room. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen or reminded you of your own strength, I hope you'll take a second to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below.